The train rattled into Hayes Station like a dying animal, brakes screaming against iron rails, steam hissing into the cold November air. Rowan Hale pressed her forehead against the window, watching the platform emerge through the fog. A handful of wooden buildings, dirt streets, men in worn coats standing beside wagons, waiting for cargo that mattered more than people. She didn't belong here. She didn't belong anywhere. The conductor moved through the car, announcing the stop with the enthusiasm of a man pronouncing a death sentence. Passengers shuffled toward the exits, farmers returning home, a merchant with leather cases, a family with children who hadn't stopped crying since Topeka. Rowan stayed in her seat, fingers knotted in her lap, staring at hands that had once held books and now held nothing. No trunks, no hat boxes, no carefully wrapped parcels tied with string. Just a single cloth bag containing 2 dresses, both mended so many times the original fabric had become a suggestion. A hairbrush with missing bristles. A book of poetry she'd stolen from a library in Chicago because she couldn't bear to leave it behind, even knowing theft was wrong, even knowing she was already damned for worse things than stolen verses. The last passenger filed past. The conductor appeared in the aisle, his expression somewhere between pity and impatience. "Miss, this is Hayes Station." "I know." "You getting off?" Her throat tightened. "Yes." She stood, legs unsteady from 3 days of travel, and moved toward the door. The November wind hit her the moment she stepped onto the platform, sharp and merciless, smelling of dust and distance. She'd left Chicago in autumn. She'd arrived in winter. A man stood near the station house, broad-shouldered and still, watching the train like he was waiting for something specific. He wore a coat that had seen hard use, a hat pulled low against the wind, boots caked with dried mud. His face was weathered in the way faces got when they spent more time looking at sky than people. Rowan's stomach twisted. That had to be him. Silas Mercer, the rancher who'd placed an advertisement in the matrimonial news. The man she'd agreed to marry without ever seeing his face, without knowing anything except that he owned land in Kansas and needed a wife, and didn't ask questions about where a woman came from or why she'd answer an advertisement from a stranger. She forced herself to walk toward him, bag clutched against her chest like a shield. Her boots, thin-soled Chicago boots, utterly wrong for this place, scraped against the wooden platform. He turned when she was 10 feet away. Their eyes met. She saw the exact moment he registered what he was looking at, saw his gaze move from her face to the single bag, to the dress that hung loose on a frame that had once been fuller, to the hollows beneath her cheekbones that no amount of carefully pinned hair could hide. Disappointment. She'd seen it before, in her father's eyes when she'd failed to marry the banker's son, in her brother's face when the school board had dismissed her, in the mirror every morning when she'd tried to recognize the woman she used to be. "Silas Mercer?" Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. He nodded slowly. "You're Miss Hale." Not a question, a confirmation, like he was checking a list and finding the goods didn't match the order. "Rowan," she said. "You can call me Rowan." "Rowan." He tested the name, then gestured toward a wagon hitched behind the station house. "I brought the wagon. It's a 2-hour ride to the homestead." No greeting, no smile, no pretense that this was anything other than a transaction. Fine. She'd expected nothing else. She followed him to the wagon, refusing to acknowledge how her hand shook as she climbed onto the wooden seat. He took her bag, felt the weight of it, or rather the lack of weight, and set it in the back without comment. He climbed up beside her, released the brake, snapped the reins. The horses started forward. They rode in silence through Hayes Station, past the general store and the feed supplier and the church with its whitewashed boards and crooked steeple. A few people looked up as they passed. A woman in an apron whispered something to her companion. 2 men outside the feed store watched with the blank curiosity of people observing strangers. Rowan kept her eyes forward, chin lifted, refusing to shrink. She'd been stared at before, whispered about, judged, let them look. Once they left the town, the prairie opened up around them, vast and empty and relentless. The road, such as it was, cut through grassland that stretched to the horizon in every direction. No trees except scattered stands of cottonwood marking creek beds. No houses except distant shapes that might have been homesteads or might have been rocks. The wind never stopped. It pushed against the wagon, whistled through gaps in the boards, pulled at Rowan's hair until pins scattered and strands whipped across her face. She tried to tuck them back. Gave up. Let the wind take what it wanted. Cold? Silas asked, the first word he'd spoken since they left town. I'm fine. There's a blanket under the seat. I said I'm fine. He didn't argue, just kept his eyes on the horses and the road and the endless grass. Rowan studied him from the corner of her eye. Older than she'd expected, maybe 35, maybe 40. Hard to tell with men who worked outside. His hands on the reins were scarred and calloused, nails rimmed with dirt that wouldn't wash out. His jaw was set in a way that suggested he didn't smile often, or maybe had forgotten how. Not handsome, not ugly, just worn. Your letter said you had a house, she said finally, because the silence was starting to feel like accusation. I do. How big? Big enough? For how many people? He glanced at her. 2 now. 3 if you count the dog. I don't mind dogs. Good. He doesn't mind people, long as they don't kick him. I won't kick your dog. Didn't figure you would. Another silence. The wagon creaked. The horses' hooves thudded against packed earth. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk screamed. You're wondering why I came, Rowan said. Silas's expression didn't change. None of my business. I'm going to be your wife. That makes it your business. Not the way I see it. He shifted the reins, guiding the horses around a rough patch. I put an advertisement because I needed help on the land, and I was tired of eating my own cooking and talking to livestock. You answered because you needed somewhere to go. Reasons don't matter. What matters is whether we can make this work. And if we can't, then we can't. He said it without emotion, like he was discussing crop rotation. But I'm not a man who quits easy, and I don't figure you are either, or you wouldn't be here. Rowan looked away, throat tight. He was right. She wouldn't be here if she had anywhere else to go. If her father hadn't died leaving debts that swallowed the house. If her brother hadn't made it clear she was a burden he couldn't afford. If the school board hadn't dismissed her for reasons they'd written in careful language that meant nothing and everything. If she hadn't been 28 years old with no prospects, no protection, and no future except becoming someone's charity case or something worse. The matrimonial news had been a last resort. Silas Mercer's advertisement had been plain to the point of brutal. Rancher, Kansas territory. Seeking wife for partnership on working homestead. Must be healthy, willing to labor, unbothered by isolation. No questions asked about past circumstances. That last line had caught her attention. No questions. She'd written back the same night. I can work, she said now, watching the prairie roll past. I'm stronger than I look. Didn't say you weren't. And I can cook, clean, manage a household. I taught school for 6 years so I can read and write and do figures. I know. You put that in your letter. I just want you to know I'm not useless. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, woman gets on a train with one bag and travels 3 days to marry a stranger. She's not useless. She's desperate or brave or both. Either way, I'm not worried about you pulling your weight. The words shouldn't have mattered. They did. Rowan blinked hard, eyes stinging from wind or something else, and turned her face away so he wouldn't see. The sun was dropping toward the horizon when the homestead finally came into view. A house, small, wood-framed, set against the endless grass like a ship on an empty sea. A barn, weathered gray. A chicken coop. Fences marking pastures where cattle grazed in scattered groups. It wasn't much, but it was more than Rowan had expected. Silas pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake, climbed down, came around to her side and offered his hand. She took it. His palm was rough, his grip steady. Her boots hit the ground. Welcome home, he said. The dog appeared from behind the house, a rangy, gray-muzzled animal that trotted over and sniffed Rowan's skirt with professional interest. She held still, let him complete his inspection. He sneezed once, then sat down and looked at Silas as if to say, "This one's acceptable." "That's Rufus," Silas said. "He's older than dirt and smarter than me." Rowan crouched down, let Rufus sniff her hand, scratched behind his ears. The dog leaned into the touch, tail thumping against the dirt. "I think he likes me," she said. "He's got good judgment." Silas grabbed her bag from the wagon and carried it toward the house. Rowan followed, Rufus padding along beside her like an escort. The door wasn't locked. Silas pushed it open and stepped aside, letting her enter first. The interior was dim, smelling of wood smoke and coffee and something else. Loneliness, maybe. Or just the particular scent of a place where one person had lived alone for too long. One room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting space. A table with 2 chairs. A stove that had seen hard use. Shelves lined with tins and jars and basic supplies. A door leading to what she assumed was a bedroom. Everything clean but spare, functional without comfort. A bachelor's house. Soon to be a married couple's house. The thought made her stomach clench. "It's not much," Silas said behind her, "but it keeps the wind out mostly." Rowan turned. He stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "It's fine," she said. "There's a bedroom. I've been sleeping out in the barn since I got your letter saying you were coming. Figured you'd want privacy until—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "Until we figure things out." Heat rushed to her face. "You don't have to sleep in the barn." "Didn't say I had to. Said I was going to. That's not— We're supposed to be married." "We will be. Reverend's coming out next week to do the ceremony. But until then, you're a guest in this house, and I'm not the kind of man who makes a woman uncomfortable under his own roof." Rowan stared at him. She'd expected many things. Demands, assumptions, the casual cruelty of a man who'd paid for something and intended to claim it. Not this. Not decency. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded. Set her bag down near the bedroom door. "I'll bring in more wood for the stove. There's beans and bacon in the larder, bread I bought in town yesterday. Help yourself to whatever you need. I'll be in the barn if you need anything." He was halfway out the door when she found her voice. "Silas?" He stopped, turned. "Why did you really send for a wife?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he looked out at the prairie, at the grass bending under the wind, at the sky going purple with dusk. "Because a man can only talk to cattle for so long before he forgets how to talk to people," he said. "And I didn't want to forget." He left before she could respond. Rowan stood in the middle of the small house, listening to his footsteps fade toward the barn. Rufus settled by the stove with a heavy sigh, apparently content that the day's excitement was over. She walked to the bedroom door, pushed it open. A bed with a quilt that looked handmade, a trunk at the foot, a washstand with a cracked mirror, window with thin curtains facing east. She set her bag on the bed, sat down beside it. The mattress was softer than she'd expected. She put her face in her hands and allowed herself, for the first time in 3 days, to cry. The next morning came cold and gray, light seeping through the curtains like something reluctant. Rowan woke to the sound of wind and the distant lowing of cattle and the creak of footsteps outside the house. She dressed quickly in the better of her 2 dresses, pinned her hair with shaking fingers, and emerged from the bedroom to find Silas standing at the stove, frying eggs in a skillet. He glanced over his shoulder. "Morning." "Morning." "Coffee's on the table. Eggs will be ready in a minute." She poured herself coffee, sat down at the table, and wrapped her hands around the cup for warmth. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but it was hot, and that mattered more. Silas brought the eggs over on 2 tin plates, sat down across from her. They ate in silence. Not comfortable, not uncomfortable, just quiet. When she'd finished, Rowan set down her fork and said, "What needs doing today?" He looked up. "You don't have to." "I'm not going to sit inside while you work. Tell me what needs doing." He studied her for a moment. Then, "Chickens need feeding. There's mending that's been piling up for 6 months. And if you're up for it, the vegetable garden's gone to hell and could use attention before the ground freezes solid." "I can do that." "It's cold work." "I don't mind cold." He nodded slowly. "All right. I'll show you where everything is." They worked through the morning, Rowan scattering feed for chickens that eyed her with deep suspicion, pulling dead plants from the garden plot, while Silas repaired a section of fence that had come loose in the last storm. The wind never stopped, and the cold worked its way through her dress until her fingers were stiff and her nose was running, but she didn't complain. Complaining wouldn't change anything. At midday, Silas came to the garden and crouched down beside where she was working. "That's enough for now," he said. "Come inside and warm up." "I'm fine." "Your lips are blue." She touched her mouth. Her fingers came away numb. "Oh." "Inside. Now." She didn't argue. They ate bread and cheese at the table while the stove worked to drive the chill from the house. Rowan's hands throbbed as feeling returned to them. "You push yourself too hard," Silas said. "I'm just trying to help." "I know, but if you work yourself sick, you're not helping anybody." She looked down at her plate. "I don't want you to think I'm weak." "I don't think that. Everyone else does." "I'm not everyone else." The words hung in the air between them. Rowan met his eyes. He looked back steadily, no judgment in his expression, just something that might have been understanding. "My father died 2 years ago," she heard herself say. "He left debts. The house went to pay them. My brother took me in, but his wife didn't want me there. I taught school for 6 years, but the board—" She stopped, swallowed. "They said I wasn't suitable, so I had nowhere to go. And no one wanted a woman my age with nothing to offer. You're offering plenty now." "Am I? You're here. That's more than nothing." Her throat tightened. "Why are you being kind to me?" "Why wouldn't I be?" "Because you don't owe me anything. Because I'm just—" She gestured helplessly. "I'm just someone who answered an advertisement." Silas leaned back in his chair. "My wife died 7 years ago," he said quietly. "Fever took her in 3 days. We'd only been married 2 years. After she was gone, I worked this land alone because I didn't know what else to do. Didn't talk to people. Didn't go to town unless I had to. Just worked and slept and worked some more. Then one day I realized I'd gone 3 weeks without speaking out loud to anything that wasn't a cow or a dog. And I thought, this is how you disappear. This is how you stop being human." He paused, looked out the window at the prairie. "So I put the advertisement in the paper. And you answered. And maybe you needed somewhere to go, but I needed someone to remind me what it's like to be a person instead of just a pair of hands that fixes fences. So don't tell me you're offering nothing, Rowan. You're offering me a reason to remember my own name." Rowan's vision blurred. She blinked hard, looked away. "I'm sorry about your wife." "And I'm sorry about whatever happened that brought you here. But we're both here now, so maybe we make the best of it." "Maybe." He stood up, carried his plate to the wash basin. "Rest this afternoon. Tomorrow we'll start planning what needs doing before winter really sets in. And next week, when the Reverend comes, we'll make this official." "Silas?" He turned. "Thank you," she said, "for not asking questions. Everyone's got a past," he said. "What matters is what we do with the time we've got left." He went back outside, leaving Rowan alone with her thoughts and the wind and the slow, unfamiliar feeling of something that might eventually become safety. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Wake before dawn, work until dark, eat simple meals, exchange a few words, sleep in separate spaces. Rowan learned the routines of the homestead, how to coax the temperamental stove into heating evenly, where Silas kept the tools, which chickens were reliable layers and which were just taking up feed. She mended his shirts and her dresses and the curtains that had started to fray. She cleaned the corners that had accumulated dust and neglect. Silas watched her work with quiet approval, never commenting on how thin she still was or how sometimes her hands shook when she thought he wasn't looking. He taught her how to milk the cow, a patient, brown-eyed creature named Bess, who tolerated Rowan's fumbling with the resigned air of someone who'd seen worse. He showed her how to read the sky for weather, how to tell which fence posts needed replacing before they failed, how to move among the cattle without spooking them. "You're a good teacher," Rowan said one afternoon, watching him demonstrate how to properly mend a leather harness. "Had practice. My wife didn't know anything about ranch work when we married. City girl, like you." "I'm not a city girl. I grew up in a town." "Towns, cities, same thing out here. Either you know the land or you don't." "And she learned?" His hand stilled on the leather. "She did. Learned fast. Loved it even. Said she'd never felt free until she could stand outside and not see another building." He glanced at Rowan. "You feel that way?" She considered. "I don't know yet. It's so empty, so quiet." "Give it time. The quiet grows on you. Or drives you mad." "That too." He went back to his work and Rowan watched his hands move. Sure, practiced, never wasted motion. Hands that knew their purpose. She wondered if she'd ever feel that certain about anything again. The Reverend came on a cold Thursday, riding out from town in a buggy that rattled worse than the train. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a voice that carried more authority than his frame suggested. "Silas," he said, climbing down from the buggy, "and this must be Miss Hale." "Rowan," she said, shaking his offered hand. "Reverend Thomas. Pleasure to meet you, though I admit I'm curious about the circumstances. Not often I'm called out to perform a marriage on such short notice." "We're practical people, Reverend," Silas said. "Didn't see the point in waiting." "Practical, yes." Reverend Thomas's gaze moved between them, assessing. "Have you given thought to what you're undertaking? Marriage is a sacred bond, not to be entered lightly." "We understand that," Rowan said, lifting her chin. "Do you?" "Because frontier marriages have a way of either forging people together or breaking them apart, and there's not much middle ground." Silas stepped forward. "Reverend, I asked you here to perform a service, not deliver a sermon. Are you willing to marry us or not?" The Reverend studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed. "I am, but I needed to be sure you both knew what you were choosing." They stood in the small house, Rufus watching from his spot by the stove, and spoke vows that sounded strange in Rowan's mouth, words about honoring and cherishing and staying faithful until death. She'd never expected to say them, certainly never expected to mean them. When it was done, Reverend Thomas pronounced them married, shook their hands, and accepted the payment Silas offered. He left with advice about attending services in town and a reminder that the community was available should they need support. Then he was gone, and Rowan and Silas stood in their house, married, strangers who'd signed papers and spoken promises. "Well," Silas said finally, "that's done. Yes." "You hungry? I could make supper." "I can make it." "You sure? I'm your wife now. I should make supper." He looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. "You're my wife, yes. But that doesn't mean you're my servant. We share the work here, Rowan. That's the partnership." Partnership. The word settled into her chest, unfamiliar and fragile. "All right," she said. "Then let's both make supper." They did, moving around each other in the small kitchen, and if their hands brushed once while reaching for the same pan, neither acknowledged it. That night, Silas brought his things in from the barn. He didn't assume, didn't demand, just set his belongings in the bedroom and said, "I can still sleep on the floor if you want, or make a bed in the main room. Whatever makes you comfortable." Rowan looked at the bed they were supposed to share, at this man who'd shown her more respect in 2 weeks than most people had shown her in years. "It's a cold night," she said quietly, "and it's a big bed. We can manage." They lay on opposite sides, a careful distance between them, both fully clothed, neither sleeping well. But they were trying, and for now, that was enough. Winter arrived in earnest 3 days after the wedding, bringing snow that turned the prairie into something unrecognizable. Rowan woke to find the window frosted over, the world beyond it erased by white. The wind howled like something alive and angry, rattling the shutters, finding every crack in the walls. Silas was already up, feeding wood into the stove. He glanced over when she emerged from the bedroom, wrapped in the quilt because the cold had seeped through everything during the night. "Storm's settling in," he said. "Going to be here a while." Rowan moved to the window, scraping frost away with her fingernail to peer outside. She couldn't see the barn, couldn't see anything except white chaos. "How long is a while?" "Day, maybe 3. Hard to tell until it passes." Her stomach tightened. "The animals?" "Already fed them, moved extra hay into the barn before it got bad. They'll be fine." He poured coffee, handed her a cup. "We're the ones who need to worry about staying warm and not going crazy from cabin fever." She took the coffee, grateful for the heat. "I've survived worse than being stuck inside." "I'm sure you have." He didn't ask what, just returned to the stove and started mixing batter for Johnny cakes. But 3 days is a long time when you're used to keeping busy. He wasn't wrong. By midday, Rowan had cleaned everything that could be cleaned, mended everything that needed mending, and reorganized the pantry shelves twice. The walls seemed to be closing in, the small house growing smaller with each hour. Silas sat at the table, working on repairing a bridle, occasionally glancing at her with something that might have been amusement. "You're wearing a path in the floor," he said finally. "I don't like sitting still." "I noticed." He set down his work. "You know how to play cards?" "I used to before—" She stopped. "Before whatever happened that you don't want to talk about." She looked at him sharply. He met her gaze without flinching. I said I wouldn't ask questions, he continued, and I won't. But you keep stopping yourself mid-sentence like you're afraid of giving something away. And I want you to know you don't have to do that here. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter to me. It should. Why? Because if you knew... Her throat closed. Silas stood up, crossed to where she stood by the window. He didn't touch her, just stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. Listen to me, he said quietly. I don't care if you ran from a bad marriage, or a bad family, or bad debts, or bad choices. I don't care if you stole something, or lied to someone, or did whatever you had to do to survive. You're here now. You're my wife. And nothing you tell me is going to change that. Rowan's eyes burned. You don't mean that. I do. You can't possibly... Try me. The words hung between them. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, the stove crackled. Rufus snored from his spot near the hearth. Rowan took a breath, then another. The school board dismissed me because a student's father made accusations. Silas waited. He said I'd been inappropriate with his son, that I'd touched him, that I'd... Her voice broke. None of it was true. But the father was influential, and I was just a school teacher, and when I tried to defend myself, they said my defensiveness proved my guilt. They dismissed me, told me I was lucky they weren't pressing charges. The whole town knew within a day. My brother's wife said I couldn't stay in their house because what would people think? So I left. She waited for disgust, for doubt, for the look she'd seen on every face in that town. Silas's expression didn't change. The boy's father... He make these accusations before or after you turned him down? Rowan's breath caught. How did you... Seen it before. Man wants something from a woman. Woman says no. Man finds a way to punish her for it. His jaw tightened. What was his name? It doesn't matter now. It matters to me. Why? Because you're telling me some bastard destroyed your life for sport, and I want to know his name. The fury in his voice was quiet but absolute. Rowan stared at him. You believe me. Of course I believe you. Everyone else? I'm not everyone else. And I know the difference between a woman telling the truth and a man making excuses for his own bad behavior. He reached out slowly, gave her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hand. You didn't deserve what happened to you, Rowan. And anyone who says different can answer to me. She couldn't speak. Could barely breathe. His hand was warm around hers, solid and real and steady. Thank you, she whispered. He squeezed her fingers gently, then released them. Now, you want to learn poker or not? They played cards until the light failed, and then, by lamplight, and Rowan found herself laughing, actually laughing, when Silas accused her of counting cards like a professional gambler. The storm raged outside, but inside something had shifted. Some wall had developed a crack. That night, when they lay in bed with the careful distance they'd maintained since the wedding, Rowan spoke into the darkness. Your wife. What was her name? Silence. Then, Catherine. Tell me about her. Why? Because you loved her. And I want to know who she was. Another long pause. She was stubborn, laughed too loud, couldn't cook worth a damn when we first married but refused to admit it. Tried to make biscuits once that came out hard enough to use as ammunition. His voice had gone soft. She'd sit outside in the evenings and read poetry out loud to the sunset. Said the prairie deserved to hear beautiful words. Rowan smiled in the darkness. She sounds wonderful. She was. He shifted. You remind me of her sometimes. How? The way you refuse to quit. The way you push yourself past what's reasonable because you're trying to prove something. He paused. Catherine worked herself sick that first winter. Wouldn't admit she was struggling until she collapsed in the barn. I nearly lost her then, and I swore I'd never let her push that hard again. Then the fever came, and there wasn't anything I could do except watch her burn up and die anyway. Rowan's throat ached. I'm sorry. Long time ago now. Doesn't make it hurt less. No, he agreed. It doesn't. They lay in silence, and Rowan found herself moving slightly closer, not quite touching, but near enough that she could feel the warmth of him through the blankets. Silas? Yeah? I'm glad I answered your advertisement. Even though you're stuck in the middle of nowhere with a stranger? You're not a stranger anymore. She felt him turn toward her in the darkness. "No," he said quietly. "I guess I'm not." The storm blew itself out by morning, leaving behind snow that glittered under weak sunlight and air so cold it burned to breathe. They dug out paths to the barn and the chicken coop, working in companionable silence that felt different from the awkward quiet of those first days. When they came back inside, faces red from cold, Rowan made coffee while Silas shook snow from his coat. She handed him a cup and their fingers brushed. This time, neither pulled away immediately. "You've got snow in your hair," he said. "So do you." He reached up, brushed flakes from her temples with gentle fingers. The gesture was simple, almost casual, but it sent warmth flooding through her chest. "There," he said, dropping his hand. "Thank you." They stood too close in the small kitchen, not quite ready to move apart. "Rowan?" Whatever he'd been about to say was interrupted by barking. Rufus stood at the door, tail wagging, nose pressed to the gap at the bottom. Silas frowned. "Someone's coming." He opened the door and Rowan followed him outside, shading her eyes against the snow glare. A wagon was making its way toward the house, moving slowly through the drifts. "That's the Hendersons," Silas said. "Neighbors from 2 miles east. I didn't know you had neighbors that close." "I don't talk about them much." His tone had gone flat. "Thomas Henderson is all right. His wife likes to know everyone's business." The wagon pulled up and a middle-aged couple climbed down. The man was heavy-set with a florid face. The woman was thin and sharp-eyed, dressed in clothes that had been fashionable once and were now just worn. "Silas," Thomas called, "wanted to check you made it through the storm all right." "We're fine. You?" "Lost part of the chicken coop roof, but nothing we can't fix." He turned to Rowan, his expression curious but not unkind. "You must be the new Mrs. Mercer." "Rowan," she said, offering her hand. He shook it firmly. "Tom Henderson. This is my wife, Margaret." Margaret's eyes moved over Rowan like she was taking inventory. "My, you're a small thing. I hope you're stronger than you look. This land doesn't forgive weakness." "I'm managing," Rowan said evenly. "Are you?" Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, we'll see come spring, won't we? Winter's easy compared to planting season. That's when you find out what people are really made of." Silas stepped forward. "Rowan's been handling everything I've asked of her, and then some. She'll do fine." "Of course she will," Margaret said, but her tone suggested she thought otherwise. "We heard you'd sent for a mail-order bride, quite the talk in town." "I'm sure it was. People were surprised you didn't court someone local. Plenty of suitable young women." "Didn't want suitable. Wanted someone who understood what they were getting into." Margaret's gaze sharpened on Rowan. "And did you understand what you were getting into?" "I'm learning," Rowan said. "Learning?" Margaret laughed. "Well, at least you're honest about it. Most city girls come out here thinking it's going to be an adventure, then turn tail and run the first time they break a nail." Tom cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Margaret, we should let them get back inside. Just wanted to make sure everyone was all right." "Yes, of course." But Margaret wasn't finished. "You'll have to come by for supper sometime, Rowan. I can give you some advice about managing a homestead. Heaven knows you'll need it." "That's kind of you," Rowan said, keeping her voice level, even though her hands had curled into fists behind her back. The Hendersons climbed back into their wagon. As they pulled away, Margaret called out, "Do try to keep up with the work, dear. Silas needs a real partner, not another burden." Rowan watched them go, jaw tight. "Don't let her get to you," Silas said quietly. Margaret Henderson could find fault with Sunrise. "She thinks I'm going to fail. She thinks everyone's going to fail. She's been like that since her daughter left for the city 5 years ago and never came back. Now she takes it out on anyone who reminds her of what she lost." "I don't remind her of her daughter. You remind her of herself. Young woman, new to the frontier, trying to find her place. Difference is, you're going to succeed, and she knows it." Rowan looked at him. "How can you be so sure?" "Because you're stubborn enough to prove her wrong out of pure spite." He smiled slightly. "Come on, let's get inside before we freeze." But Margaret Henderson's words stayed with Rowan through the rest of the day and into the next week as winter tightened its grip on the prairie. Every task felt weighted with the need to prove something. She worked until her hands cracked and bled, until her back screamed and her legs trembled, pushing herself past reasonable limits because somewhere in the back of her mind, Margaret's voice whispered that she wasn't enough. Silas noticed. Of course he noticed. "You're doing it again," he said one evening, finding her mending harnesses by lamplight, even though her eyes were red with exhaustion. "Doing what?" "Trying to prove you belong here by working yourself into the ground." "I'm fine." "Rowan," she set down the leather. "What do you want me to say? That I'm tired? That my hands hurt? That every time I close my eyes I hear Margaret Henderson telling me I'm not good enough? I want you to say you'll stop before you make yourself sick." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because she's right." The words burst out before she could stop them. "I'm not good enough. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm learning as I go and making mistakes, and every day I wake up terrified that you're going to realize you made a terrible choice, and—" She stopped, breathing hard. Silas crossed the room and crouched in front of her chair. "Look at me." She didn't want to, did anyway. "You are enough," he said. "You've been enough since the day you stepped off that train, and if you can't believe that yet, then believe that I chose you. Not some local girl who knew how to rope cattle and birth calves. Not someone suitable who could keep house and look proper at church. I chose you because something in your letter told me you understood what it meant to need a fresh start. And I was right." Rowan's vision blurred. "I'm scared I'm going to disappoint you." "You won't. You can't know that." "I can." He took her damaged hands gently. "These tell me everything I need to know. You're fighting for this, for us, and that's all I'm asking." She looked down at their joined hands. "I don't know how to stop proving myself." "Then don't stop. Just slow down enough that you don't burn out before spring." He released her hands and stood. "Come to bed. The harnesses can wait." She followed him, bone-tired and aching, and when they lay down this time, Silas reached across the space between them and took her hand. She held on tight, and for the first time since arriving on the prairie, she slept without nightmares. The hard freeze broke in late December, giving way to days of bitter cold punctuated by occasional thaws that turned the snow to slush and the roads to mud. Silas made a trip into town for supplies, asking if Rowan wanted to come. She did and didn't. The thought of facing Margaret Henderson's smug assessment again made her stomach turn. But staying alone felt like hiding. "I'll come," she said. They rode in together, the wagon wheels squelching through mud, passing homesteads where smoke rose from chimneys and livestock huddled near barns. Other wagons dotted the road, families heading to town for the same reason, stockpiling before the next storm hit. Hayes Station looked different in winter, smaller somehow, more huddled against the cold. People moved with purpose, not lingering to chat the way Rowan imagined they might in warmer months. Silas pulled up in front of the general store. "I'll get the feed and supplies." "You need anything particular?" "Thread, needles, maybe some fabric if they have any that's not too expensive." He handed her money. She stared at it. "What's this for?" "Buying what you need. You already gave me money last week. And you spent it on supplies for the house. This is for you." "I don't need—" "Rowan." His voice was patient. "You're my wife. That means what's mine is yours. That includes money for fabric and thread and whatever else you want. Stop arguing and go buy something that makes you happy." She took the money, throat tight. "Thank you." Inside the store, the warmth hit her like a wall. She stood for a moment, letting the heat seep into her bones, before making her way toward the fabric section. The proprietor's wife, a woman named Mrs. Yates, with kind eyes and graying hair, looked up from behind the counter. "Mrs. Mercer, good to see you again." "You too." Rowan had met her briefly on the trip where Silas had bought supplies before the wedding. She'd been one of the few people who hadn't stared or whispered. "How are you settling in?" "Well enough." "That's good. I know the prairie can be hard on newcomers." She moved around the counter. "What can I help you find today?" "Thread, needles, and I was hoping to look at fabric." "Of course. What are you making?" "Curtains for the bedroom, and maybe a new dress if there's enough." Mrs. Yates pulled out bolts of fabric, laying them across the counter. "These just came in from Kansas City. Not fancy, but good sturdy cotton. This blue would look lovely on you." Rowan touched the fabric, plain, practical, but nicer than anything she'd worn in 2 years. "How much?" Mrs. Yates quoted a price. Rowan did the math in her head, calculating how much she'd need. "I'll take 3 yards, and the thread and needles." While Mrs. Yates cut and wrapped the fabric, another woman entered the store. Rowan recognized her from church, one of Margaret Henderson's friends, a pinch-faced woman whose name she couldn't remember. The woman's eyes landed on Rowan. Her expression curdled. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, making the title sound like an insult. "Ma'am, I heard you had quite the time during the last storm. Margaret said you looked half frozen when they stopped by." The storm was difficult for everyone. Yes, but most of us are used to it. I suppose you're still learning. She moved closer, voice dropping to a stage whisper. You know, people are talking. Are they? About you and Silas, about how quickly you married, about how little anyone knows about you. The woman's smile was sharp. There are questions about your past, Mrs. Mercer, and in a community like this, questions have a way of becoming answers whether they're true or not. Rowan's hands tightened on the counter. Then I suppose people should ask me directly instead of gossiping. Oh, I'm not gossiping. I'm simply concerned. Silas is a respected member of this community. It would be a shame if his new wife brought scandal to his doorstep. Mrs. Yates's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Mrs. Patterson, I believe the feed store is where you meant to be. This is the general store. Mrs. Patterson's smile didn't waver. Of course. I just thought I should warn Mrs. Mercer about the realities of frontier life. We take care of our own here, but we also protect ourselves from outsiders who might bring trouble. She left, the door banging shut behind her. Rowan stood frozen, humiliation burning in her chest. Don't listen to her, Mrs. Yates said quietly. Abigail Patterson has nothing better to do than stir up trouble. She's not wrong, though. I am an outsider. So was I 30 years ago when I married Mr. Yates and moved here from Pennsylvania. You know what I learned? The prairie doesn't care where you're from. It only cares what you're made of. She pushed the wrapped package across the counter. You're stronger than they think, Mrs. Mercer. Don't let them make you believe otherwise. Rowan paid, thanked her, and left the store before anyone else could corner her with thinly veiled accusations. Silas was loading sacks of feed into the wagon. He took one look at her face and frowned. What happened? Nothing. Rowan. Someone made it clear I'm not welcome here. That's all. His jaw tightened. Who? It doesn't matter. It matters to me. Who was it? She told him. Watched his expression go cold and hard. Wait here, he said. Silas, don't... But he was already striding toward the feed store. Rowan followed, heart pounding. Inside, Mrs. Patterson was examining seed packets. She looked up as Silas entered, her expression shifting to false sweetness. Silas, how lovely to... Stay away from my wife, he said, voice low and dangerous. Mrs. Patterson blinked. I beg your pardon? You heard me. Whatever you said to her in the general store, whatever questions you think you have the right to ask, keep them to yourself. She's my wife. That makes her part of this community whether you like it or not. And if I hear you've been spreading rumors or making her uncomfortable, we're going to have a problem. I was simply expressing concern. No, you were being cruel because you've got nothing better to do with your time. Find a new hobby, Mrs. Patterson, and leave my wife alone. He turned and walked out, leaving the woman standing with her mouth open. Rowan met him at the wagon. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. He helped her up onto the seat, then climbed up beside her. Anyone gives you trouble, you tell me. I meant what I said. You're my wife, and that means you're under my protection. I don't need protecting. Maybe not, but you're getting it anyway. He snapped the reins. And for what it's worth, half these people weren't born here either. They've just been here long enough to forget what it felt like to be new. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking through the mud. Then Rowan said quietly, Thank you. For what? For defending me, for believing me, for not asking me to explain or justify or prove I belong. He glanced at her. You're my wife. You belong because I say you belong. Anyone who has a problem with that can answer to me. Something warm unfurled in Rowan's chest. She reached across the space between them and laid her hand on his arm. He covered it with his own, and they rode home like that, holding on. January brought more snow, more cold, more days when the world outside the house was too hostile to venture into. But inside, something was growing. Conversations that lasted past dark. Shared work that felt less like obligation and more like partnership. moments when their hands brushed and neither pulled away. One night, Silas taught Rowan how to play chess using pieces he'd carved from wood years ago. She learned quickly, her competitive streak emerging as she plotted moves 3 turns ahead. "You're dangerous," he said, watching her capture his bishop. "I warned you I don't like losing." "I'm starting to realize that." He moved his knight. "Check." She studied the board, calculating, then smiled and moved her queen. "Checkmate." He stared at the board. "How did you... You were so focused on attacking my king, you didn't see I was setting up your defeat 4 moves ago." She leaned back, satisfaction warming through her. "Never underestimate a schoolteacher, Mr. Mercer." He laughed, a real full laugh that transformed his face. "I'll remember that." Their eyes met across the board. The lamp flickered. Outside wind rattled the shutters. "Silas?" "Yeah? I'm glad you sent for a wife." "Me too." The space between them felt charged, full of possibility. Rowan's heart beat faster. This was the moment where something could shift from partnership to something more. Silas leaned forward slightly. Rowan didn't pull back. Their lips met, tentative at first, then deeper. His hand came up to cup her face, gentle and careful, giving her every chance to retreat. She didn't. She leaned into him instead, kissing him back with years of loneliness and hope, and the strange, fragile thing that was blooming between them. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I should have asked first," Silas said. "I would have said yes." "Good to know." He smiled slightly. "Can I ask now?" "Ask what?" "To kiss you again." She answered by kissing him first. They made their way to the bedroom, nervous and careful, 2 people learning each other in the darkness. It wasn't smooth or perfect. There were awkward moments and whispered apologies and uncertain touches. But there was also tenderness and patience and the slow realization that this fragile thing they'd built from necessity was becoming real. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Rowan's head on Silas's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "Better than all right." His arm tightened around her. "I didn't think this would happen. When I sent that advertisement, I thought I was looking for companionship. Someone to share the work. I didn't expect..." He paused. "I didn't expect to care this much." Rowan tilted her head to look at him. "Regret it?" "Not even a little." He brushed hair from her face. "You?" "No." She meant it. Whatever had brought her here, desperation, fear, the wreckage of her old life, it had led to this. To him. To the possibility of something she'd stopped believing in. "Good," he said, and pulled her closer. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and when Rowan woke in the deepest part of the night, she didn't feel the familiar panic that usually came with darkness. Instead, she felt safe. February thawed into March, bringing mud and melting snow, and the first hints that winter might eventually release its grip. Silas started planning the spring planting, spreading seed catalogs across the table, while Rowan mended and cooked and occasionally offered opinions that he actually listened to. "What about peach trees?" she said one evening, looking over his shoulder at a catalog page. "Peach trees?" "For the orchard. You said you wanted to expand it. Peaches don't do well this far north, too cold. But what if they did? What if we tried?" He looked at her. "You want to plant peach trees?" "I want to plant something that says we believe in tomorrow. That we're building for years we haven't seen yet." She traced the illustration with one finger. "My mother had a peach tree when I was little. Every summer we'd make preserves. It's one of the few good memories I have." Silas studied her face. Then he pulled the catalog closer. "All right, we'll order 2. If they survive, we'll know the land can support them. If they don't, we'll try something else." "Really?" "Really." He covered her hand with his. "We're building a future here, Rowan. Might as well have peaches in it." She kissed him, right there at the kitchen table, and he laughed against her mouth. "What was that for?" "For saying yes. For believing in ridiculous things like peach trees in Kansas. For making me believe, too. Anytime." The first signs of spring brought new challenges. Fences damaged by winter storms needed repair. Equipment needed to be checked and cleaned. The garden plot needed to be prepared for planting. Silas worked long hours, and Rowan worked beside him, learning as she went. She was turning soil in the garden one afternoon when nausea hit her like a fist. She barely made it to the edge of the plot before she was sick, retching into the grass while her vision swam. When it passed, she sat back on her heels, breathing hard. It wasn't the first time. She'd been queasy for over a week, had noticed her courses were late, had felt a strange tenderness in her breasts that hadn't been there before. She knew what it meant. Fear and wonder warred in her chest. She was carrying Silas's child. She didn't tell him that night, or the next. She needed time to process it herself, to wrap her mind around the reality of new life growing inside her when so much of her old life had been about endings. But Silas noticed. Of course he did. "You've been quiet," he said one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the prairie. "Just thinking." "About what?" She took a breath, let it out. "About the future." "What about it?" "Silas." She turned to face him. "I'm pregnant." He went very still. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor confirming it. But I know the signs." For a long moment he didn't move. Then he reached out and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Are you all right?" he asked into her hair. "I don't know. I'm scared." "So am I." She pulled back to look at him. "You are?" Terrified. His hand moved to rest gently against her still flat stomach. "Catherine was pregnant when she died. I didn't know until after. The fever took them both." His voice roughened. "I can't lose you, Rowan." "You won't. You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise I'll fight. For me, for the baby, for us." She covered his hand with hers. "We're in this together." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. "Together," he agreed. "Whatever comes." But the fear didn't leave his eyes, and Rowan understood. The frontier took what it wanted, and promises meant nothing against fever or difficult births or the 100 other ways life could end before it began. All they could do was hold on and hope it was enough. Spring arrived in fits and starts. Warm days followed by cold snaps that threatened the early seedlings Rowan had planted with shaking hands. She worked the garden in the mornings before the nausea got too bad, fingers in the soil, coaxing life from ground that had been frozen solid just weeks before. Silas watched her like she might break, hovering close enough to help but far enough that she didn't feel smothered. "I'm not made of glass," she said one morning, catching him staring as she weeded around the potato plants. "I know that." "Then stop looking at me like I might shatter." He crouched down beside her, pulling weeds with practiced efficiency. "Can't help it. You're carrying my child. That makes you precious cargo." "I'm still the same person I was 2 months ago." "No, you're not. 2 months ago you were just my wife. Now you're the mother of my child. That changes things." She sat back on her heels, studying his face. The fear was still there, living behind his eyes like something he couldn't shake. "You think I'm gonna die?" "I think childbirth kills women every day out here. I think we're 20 miles from the nearest doctor and an hour from town in good weather. I think Catherine—" He stopped, jaw working. "I'm not Catherine." "I know. Do you? Because you're treating me like I'm already dying, and I'm not. I'm growing a life, Silas, our life. And I need you to believe I'm strong enough to see it through." He looked at her for a long moment, then reached out and touched her face with dirt-stained fingers. "I do believe that. I'm just scared of losing what I've found. Then help me be strong instead of treating me like I'm fragile. Work with me, trust me. Don't make me fight you and the pregnancy at the same time." He nodded slowly. "All right. But you have to promise me something." "What?" "If something feels wrong, you tell me immediately. No pushing through, no pretending you're fine when you're not." "I can do that. And when it's time for the baby to come, we're bringing in someone who knows what they're doing. Mrs. Patterson's mother delivered half the babies in this county before she died. Her daughter learned from her. I don't like the woman, but I'll swallow my pride if it means you and the baby have a better chance." Rowan's throat tightened. "You'd ask her for help after what she said to me?" "I'd ask the devil himself if it kept you alive." His hand moved to her stomach. "Both of you." She covered his hand with hers. "Then we have a deal." They worked side by side until the sun climbed high and Rowan's back started aching. Silas helped her up, steadying her when she swayed slightly, and they walked back to the house together. Rufus trotted alongside them, graying muzzle lifted to catch the spring wind. Inside, Rowan made lunch while Silas cleaned up. They'd fallen into rhythms over the winter, learned each other's movements and moods, developed a shorthand that made the small house feel less cramped and more like home. She knew he took his coffee black and strong, that he hated beans but would eat them without complaint, if that's what they had, that he read slowly but thoroughly, mouthing words sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. He knew she woke with nightmares more often than she admitted, that she sang under her breath when she thought no one could hear, that she touched the stolen poetry book sometimes like it was a talisman against everything she'd lost. They knew each other, not completely, not the way people who'd spent decades together knew each other, but enough to build on. "I want to plant the peach trees this week," Rowan said as they ate, "before the ground gets too warm." "You sure you're up for it?" "I'm pregnant, not dying. Stop asking me that." He held up his hands. "Just checking." "Check less, trust more." "Yes, ma'am." They planted the trees 3 days later on a morning that smelled like rain and new grass. Silas dug the holes while Rowan prepared the saplings, trimming damaged roots and soaking them in water mixed with composted soil. The trees looked impossibly small and fragile, bare branches reaching toward a sky that promised storms. "You really think these will survive?" Silas asked, lowering the first sapling into its hole. "I think we're going to do everything we can to make sure they do." Rowan helped him pack soil around the roots, pressing firmly. "And if they don't, at least we tried." "That's not much comfort." "It's all the comfort we get out here. You told me that yourself." She moved to the second tree. "Everything we plant is a gamble. These are just a bigger bet than usual." They worked in companionable silence, and when both trees were planted and watered, they stood back to survey their work. 2 spindly saplings, barely 3 feet tall, standing in soil that might or might not support them. "They look lonely," Rowan said. "Give them time. If they take, we'll plant more." "An orchard." "Maybe. Long way off from that right now." She leaned against him, and his arm came around her shoulders automatically. "Everything worth having is a long way off. Doesn't mean we stop reaching for it." He kissed the top of her head. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You're just now noticing." His laugh rumbled through his chest. "Fair point." The rain came that afternoon, gentle and steady, soaking into the thirsty ground. Rowan stood at the window watching it fall, one hand resting on her stomach where the baby was still too small to feel, but present nonetheless. A life growing in secret, preparing for a world that would test it from the first breath. She wondered if the child would look like Silas or like her, whether it would have his steady calm or her nervous energy, whether it would love the prairie or hate it the way she'd hated it those first weeks when everything felt hostile and wrong. "You're worrying again," Silas said from the table where he was mending a bridle. "How can you tell?" "You get a line right here." He tapped between his eyebrows. "Shows up every time you're chewing on something difficult." "I'm wondering what kind of world we're bringing a child into." "A hard one, same as every world that's ever been." "That's not comforting." "Wasn't meant to be comforting. Was meant to be honest." He set down his work. "But it's also a world with peach trees and people who choose each other instead of just settling for what's convenient. That counts for something." She turned from the window. "You really think we chose each other? We were both desperate." "Maybe at first, but desperation brought us together. What we did after that was choice." He stood, crossed to her, pulled her into his arms. "I choose you, Rowan. Every day. Even when you're stubborn and refuse to admit you're tired. Even when you push yourself too hard trying to prove something that doesn't need proving. I choose you." Her eyes stung. "I choose you too." They stood there holding each other while rain drummed on the roof, and Rowan thought maybe this was enough. Maybe choosing each other over and over was how you survived places that tried to break you. 2 weeks later, word came that changed everything. Tom Henderson rode over with news that the Baileys, a family who'd homesteaded 5 miles north, had lost both parents to fever within days of each other. 3 children remained, the oldest barely 13. "Community's trying to figure out what to do with them," Tom said, standing in the doorway with his hat in his hands. "Can't send them back east. No family to take them. Can't leave them on the land alone. Some folks are saying we should split them up, farm them out to families who need extra hands." "Split them up?" Rowan's voice was sharp. "They just lost their parents. You want to separate them too?" Tom looked uncomfortable. "Not my idea." But not everyone can take 3 extra mouths, and keeping them together means someone's got to shoulder a heavy load. Silas exchanged a glance with Rowan. She could see him calculating, weighing the burden against their own circumstances. They were about to have a baby. They had enough work managing their own land. Taking in 3 orphans would stretch them thin in ways that might break. She thought of those children sitting in someone's house, knowing their parents were dead, hearing adults discuss dividing them like livestock. "We'll take them," she said. Tom blinked. "All 3? "All 3. "Rowan," Silas said quietly. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" She followed him into the bedroom, knowing what he was going to say. "We can't take 3 children," he said the moment the door closed. "Not with you pregnant. Not with everything we're trying to manage already. We can't let them be separated. Sometimes that's the kindest option." "No, it's not. It's the easiest option for everyone except those kids." She stepped closer. "I know what it's like to have nowhere to go, to know you're not wanted. I won't do that to children who've already lost everything. I understand that, but when I showed up on that train with nothing, you didn't turn me away because it was inconvenient. You gave me a chance." Her voice caught. "Let's give them the same." Silas ran a hand through his hair, the gesture frustrated. "It's not the same situation. Isn't it? They need somewhere to belong. We have space. We have land. We have—" She pressed a hand to her stomach. "We have a chance to show our child what it means to help people who can't help themselves." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he sighed, and she knew she'd won. "6 months, he said. "We take them for 6 months while the community figures out a permanent solution. That's all I can promise. 6 months is enough to keep them together, to show them they matter." He cupped her face. "You have a hell of a heart, Rowan Mercer." "So do you. You just hide it better." They told Tom, who looked relieved and worried in equal measure. The children arrived 2 days later in the back of a wagon, 3 small figures with hollow eyes and clothes that hadn't been washed in who knew how long. The oldest, Sarah, clutched her younger siblings like she was afraid someone might tear them away. The middle child, a boy named Daniel, stared at nothing. The youngest, a girl of maybe 6 named Lily, had her thumb in her mouth and tear tracks on her face. Rowan's heart cracked looking at them. "Hello?" she said gently, crouching down to their level. "I'm Rowan. This is Silas, and that's Rufus. We're glad you're here." Sarah's eyes were suspicious. "For how long?" "As long as you need to be." "That's what the last people said. Then they said they couldn't manage and sent us away." "Well, we're not sending you away." Rowan straightened. "Let's get you inside and fed. You must be hungry." They were. They ate like they were afraid the food might disappear, barely chewing, eyes darting around the room like they expected punishment. Rowan and Silas exchanged looks over their heads. These children had been through something worse than grief. After the meal, Rowan showed them where they'd sleep. The main room for now, pallets made up by the stove. It wasn't ideal, but it was warm and clean. Sarah looked like she wanted to argue but was too tired. Daniel said nothing, just lay down and turned toward the wall. Lily wouldn't let go of her sister. "It's all right," Sarah told her quietly. "I'm right here." "You promise?" "I promise." Rowan left them there and found Silas on the porch, staring out at the darkening prairie. "That bad?" she asked. "Worse. Those kids have been through hell. Then we give them something better. For 6 months. For as long as it takes." He looked at her. "You're already planning to keep them permanently, aren't you?" "I'm planning to give them a chance. What happens after that is up to all of us." He shook his head, but he was almost smiling. "You're going to be the death of me, woman." "Probably, but at least you'll die doing something right." The children settled in slowly, cautiously, like animals who'd been kicked too often to trust kindness. Sarah was 13 and fierce, protective of her siblings to the point of aggression. She questioned everything Rowan and Silas did, watched them constantly for signs of cruelty or deception. Daniel was 11 and silent, doing work without being asked but never speaking unless directly questioned. Lily was 6 and attached to Sarah like a shadow, following her everywhere, crying at night until her sister held her. Rowan gave them space and structure in equal measure. Chores that needed doing but weren't overwhelming. Regular meals at regular times. Patience when they flinched at sudden movements or hoarded food in their pockets. Silas taught Daniel how to mend fences and care for the livestock, working alongside the boy in companionable silence that seemed to suit them both. Slowly, Daniel started asking questions. Small ones at first, about the cattle, about the land, about how things worked. Then bigger ones, about what happened to homesteads when people died, about whether Silas would really let them stay. Long as you're willing to work and follow the rules, you've got a place here, Silas told him one afternoon while they repaired a gate. What if we can't work hard enough? Then we'll figure it out, but I don't think that's going to be a problem. You're one of the hardest workers I've seen. Daniel's face did something complicated. My pa always said I was lazy. Your pa was wrong. The boy was quiet for a long time after that. But that night at supper, he looked Silas in the eye and said, "Thank you." It was a start. Sarah was harder to reach. She held onto her suspicion like armor, deflecting every attempt at connection with sharp words or cold silence. Rowan didn't push. She just kept showing up, kept offering help, kept treating Sarah like a person instead of a problem. Then one morning, Rowan woke to find Sarah scrubbing the kitchen floor before dawn. "You don't have to do that," Rowan said from the doorway. Sarah didn't look up. "I know." "Then why are you?" "Because you took us in. Because you're letting us stay. Because—" Her voice cracked. "Because I don't know how else to pay you back." Rowan crossed the room and crouched beside her, taking the scrub brush from her hands. "You don't owe me anything, Sarah. You're not a debt to be paid. You're a child who deserves safety and care and the chance to grieve without having to earn your keep. That's not how the world works. Maybe not, but that's how this house works." Rowan set the brush aside. "Your job is to be 13, to look after your siblings and do your chores and remember your parents. My job is to make sure you can do that without worrying about whether there's going to be food on the table or a roof over your head. Understand?" Sarah's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Why are you being nice to us?" "Because someone was nice to me when I had nothing, and because you deserve kindness, even if no one else has shown it to you lately." The girl broke then, sobbing into her hands while Rowan held her. All the fear and grief and anger she'd been holding back poured out in waves that shook her whole body. Rowan just held on, rocking slightly, letting her cry herself out. When it was over, Sarah pulled back, wiping her face roughly. "Sorry." "Don't be. You're allowed to fall apart sometimes. I have to be strong for Lily and Daniel. You can be strong and still need help. Those things aren't opposites." Sarah looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up the scrub brush. "Can I finish the floor anyway? It helps me think." "If you want to, but eat breakfast first." "All right." It wasn't perfect. There were still hard days when Sarah retreated behind her walls, or Daniel went silent for hours, or Lily woke screaming from nightmares. But there were also days when Lily laughed at Rufus's antics, when Daniel asked Silas to teach him something new, when Sarah let Rowan braid her hair without flinching. Progress, slow and uneven, but real. Rowan's pregnancy advanced through it all. Her stomach began to swell, subtle at first, and then unmistakable. The nausea faded, but exhaustion took its place. Some days she could barely keep her eyes open past supper. Other days she felt strong enough to work from dawn to dusk. The children noticed. Sarah started doing more around the house without being asked. Daniel took over some of Rowan's garden work. Even Lily helped, fetching water and collecting eggs with careful concentration. "They're worried about you," Silas said one evening after the children had gone to bed. "I know." "Are you worried?" She considered lying, then decided against it. "Yes. Not about the baby. That part feels right, feels strong, but about everything else. About whether I can manage a newborn and 3 children who need so much. About whether we can keep them like I promised. About—" She stopped. "About dying." "Yes." He pulled her against his side. "I'm scared too, but we've gotten through everything else. We'll get through this." "You can't know that." "No, but I can choose to believe it, and I can choose to fight for it." His hand rested on her stomach where the baby was starting to move, small flutters that felt like hope. "We're in this together, remember?" "Together," she agreed, and let herself believe it. May brought warm days and violent storms that tore across the prairie with terrifying speed. They lost part of the barn roof in one storm, had to round up scattered cattle after another. The garden survived, but barely, and Rowan spent anxious hours checking the peach trees for damage. They'd leafed out, green and fragile, bending in the wind but not breaking. "They're tougher than they look," Silas said, finding her standing beside them after a particularly bad storm. "So are we," Rowan replied, and meant it. The community gradually accepted the children's presence at the Mercer homestead. Some people, like Mrs. Yates, stopped by with donations of clothing or food. Others, like Margaret Henderson, made pointed comments about taking on more than they could handle. Rowan ignored the latter and accepted the former with grace, learning who could be trusted and who couldn't. In late May, Tom Henderson brought news that the county had decided the Bailey children could stay with Silas and Rowan permanently if they were willing. The 6-month trial period was officially over. Silas and Rowan sat the children down that evening to tell them. "The county says you can stay here as long as you want," Silas said, "but that's up to you. If you want to, this is your home. If you'd rather go somewhere else, we'll help you find it. No hard feelings either way." Sarah looked at her siblings. Some silent communication passed between them. Then she turned back to Silas and Rowan. "Can we really stay?" "Really," Rowan said, "even when the baby comes?" "Especially when the baby comes. That baby's going to need older siblings to teach them everything we don't know." Lily's face lit up. "I can be a big sister?" "The best big sister." Daniel spoke up, voice quiet but steady. "What if we make mistakes? What if we're too much trouble?" "Everyone makes mistakes," Silas said. "And you're not too much trouble. You're family. That's different." Family. The word hung in the air, fragile and immense. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "We'd like to stay." "Then it's settled." Rowan held out her arms, and after a moment's hesitation, all 3 children crowded into the embrace. They held each other while Rufus wagged his tail, and Silas watched with an expression that made Rowan's heart ache. This was what they'd built. Not a perfect family, not a smooth or easy one, but a real one. People who'd been broken and lost, finding each other in the vastness of the prairie and choosing to hold on. That night, lying in bed with Silas's hand on her stomach and the sound of children sleeping in the next room, Rowan thought about peach trees and promises. About things that looked too fragile to survive but did anyway, through stubbornness or luck or the simple refusal to give up. "We're going to make it," she whispered into the darkness. "Yeah," Silas agreed, "we are." And for the first time since stepping off that train 6 months ago, Rowan believed him completely. June arrived with heat that shimmered off the prairie and turned the air thick and heavy. Rowan's pregnancy had become impossible to hide, her belly round and tight, the baby moving constantly now. She felt clumsy and awkward, her balance thrown off, her back aching with the weight. "You should rest more," Sarah said, finding her folding laundry in the heat of midday. "I'm fine." "You say that a lot." "Doesn't make it true." Rowan smiled despite herself. "When did you get so bossy?" "Learned from the best." Sarah took the laundry basket. "Go sit down. I'll finish this." "Sarah, please. You've taken care of us for months. Let us take care of you." Rowan's throat tightened. She nodded and went to sit on the porch where a breeze provided some relief. Silas was working on the new section of fence, Daniel helping him. Lily was in the garden, carefully watering the plants like Rowan had taught her. This was her family now. Odd and cobbled together and nothing like what she'd imagined as a girl, but hers. The baby kicked hard, and Rowan gasped, hand flying to her stomach. "You all right?" Silas called from the fence line. "Fine. Just active." He dropped his tools and came over, kneeling beside her chair. "Let me feel." She guided his hand to where the baby was moving. His eyes widened when he felt the kick. "That's strong. Your child is already stubborn. Takes after you. Takes after both of us." She covered his hand. "Are you ready for this?" "No." "Are you?" "No." They looked at each other and started laughing, the absurdity of their situation hitting them both at once. Here they were, about to bring a life into a world that had tried to break them both, surrounded by children they'd never planned for, building something from nothing on land that gave grudgingly at best. And they were happy. Not perfectly, not without fear or doubt, but genuinely happy in a way neither had expected to feel again. "We're going to be all right," Silas said, still laughing. "We really are," Rowan agreed. The baby kicked again, as if in agreement, and they held on to each other while the Kansas sun beat down and the prairie stretched endlessly around them, indifferent and eternal in theirs. July scorched the prairie until the grass turned brown and brittle. The heat was relentless, bearing down from a sky bleached almost white, making every breath feel like inhaling from an oven. Rowan moved slowly through her days, her body heavy and awkward, the baby sitting low now and pressing on everything. Sleep came in fragments. Her ankles swelled. Her back never stopped aching. She refused to complain. "You're allowed to say it hurts," Silas told her one evening, watching her shift positions for the third time in as many minutes. "Saying it won't change anything. Might make you feel better. Or it might make me feel weak." He sighed. "You're not weak, Rowan. You're growing a whole person while managing a household and 3 children in the middle of a heat wave. That's about as far from weak as it gets." Tell that to my body. It seems to have forgotten how to do anything useful. "Your body is doing the most useful thing possible right now." She looked at him, saw the worry he was trying to hide, and softened. "I'm all right. Uncomfortable, but all right. When do you think?" "Soon. Maybe a week, maybe less." She pressed a hand to her stomach where the baby had gone quiet, conserving energy for what was coming. "I can feel it. Things are different." His face went pale. "Different how?" "Just different. Lower, heavier. Like everything's getting ready." "Should I send for Mrs. Patterson's daughter?" The thought of Abigail Patterson in her house made Rowan's stomach turn, but Silas was right. They needed someone who knew what they were doing, and Alice Patterson had helped deliver more babies than anyone else in the county. "Yes," she said. "Send for her tomorrow." He did, riding into town at first light and returning with a message that Alice would come when the time arrived. She'd bring her supplies and her experience, and she'd stay until mother and baby were stable. The cost would be reasonable. The conditions were that Silas would keep his opinions about her mother to himself. "I can manage that," Silas said grimly, "long as she keeps Rowan and the baby alive." The children sensed something shifting. They became quieter, more careful, watching Rowan with worried eyes. Sarah took over most of the cooking. Daniel doubled his efforts with the chores. Even Lily tried to help, though her attempts often created more work than they saved. "You don't need to tiptoe around me," Rowan said one afternoon, finding all 3 of them whispering in the corner. They jumped, guilty. "We're not," Sarah said too quickly. "You are. And I appreciate it, but I'm not dying. I'm just having a baby." "Women die having babies," Daniel said bluntly. "Our mother's sister did." The room went silent. Rowan lowered herself carefully into a chair, breathing through the tightness in her chest. "Yes," she said quietly. "They do, sometimes, but most of the time they don't. Most of the time it's hard and painful and scary, but both mother and baby come through fine." "But you don't know which you'll be," Lily whispered. "No, I don't. None of us knows what's coming. That's just life." She held out her hands. After a moment, all 3 children came to her. She pulled them close as best she could with her swollen belly in the way. "But I promise you this. I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight harder than I've ever fought for anything, because I have you 3 to come back to. And I have Silas. And I have this baby who deserves a chance to know their family. So yes, I'm scared. But I'm not giving up. Understand?" They nodded against her, holding tight. "Good. Now someone needs to start supper before your father gets back and tries to cook something inedible." Sarah laughed, watery but real. "I'll do it." They scattered to their tasks, and Rowan sat alone for a moment, letting herself acknowledge the fear she'd been pushing down for weeks. Childbirth was dangerous anywhere. Out here, 20 miles from a doctor, with only a midwife and hope to rely on, it was potentially deadly. She thought of Catherine, of the baby Silas had never known, of all the women buried in the small cemetery outside Hayes Station, their graves marked with dates that told stories of lives cut short by the very act of creating life. Then she thought of the peach trees, still alive despite everyone's predictions, of Sarah's slow smile, of Daniel's questions, of Lily's laughter, of Silas's hand in hers during the long nights. She thought of everything she had to live for. The pain started 3 days later, in the small hours before dawn. Not the sharp, impossible contractions she'd heard about, but a slow, rhythmic tightening that woke her from restless sleep. She lay still for a while, timing them, making sure this was real and not just another false alarm. They were real. She reached over and touched Silas's shoulder. He woke instantly, the way he always did, alert in a heartbeat. "It's time," she said. He was out of bed and pulling on clothes before she could say anything else. How far apart? 10 minutes, maybe. They're not bad yet. I'm getting Alice. Silas, wait. But he was already moving, grabbing his coat, heading for the door. She heard him in the barn, heard the horse's hooves pounding away into the darkness. Rowan lay back down, breathing through the next contraction. It wasn't terrible. Uncomfortable, tightening around her middle like a fist, but manageable. She could do this. Women had been doing this since time began. She could too. The bedroom door creaked open. Sarah stood there, white-faced in her nightgown. Is it the baby? Yes. Are you all right? So far. Another contraction started. Rowan breathed through it, counted in her head, waited for it to pass. But I'm going to need help. Can you wake Daniel and Lily? Get the fire going and water heating? There's clean linens in the trunk. Sarah nodded and disappeared. Rowan heard her moving through the house, quiet but efficient, getting things ready. The girl had seen her mother give birth to Lily. She knew what needed doing. By the time Silas returned with Alice Patterson, full dawn was breaking and the contractions were 5 minutes apart. Rowan had moved to the main room, pacing because lying down made everything worse. Sweat soaked through her nightgown despite the early morning cool. Alice came through the door carrying a worn leather bag, her expression all business. She was 40-something, sturdy and plain-faced, with capable hands and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Mercer, she said, setting down her bag. Let's see where we are. She examined Rowan with professional efficiency, asking questions, feeling the contractions, checking things Rowan tried not to think too hard about. When she was done, she washed her hands and turned to Silas. You need to keep those children occupied and out of the way. This is going to take a while. How long? First babies. Could be hours. Could be a day. No way to know. She turned to Rowan. Have you been walking? Yes. Good. Keep doing that. I'll tell you when it's time to stop. The next hours blurred together. Rowan walked circuits around the room, pausing when contractions hit, breathing through them while Alice watched with clinical assessment. The pain intensified gradually, each wave stronger than the last, until walking became difficult, and all she could do was grip the back of a chair and try to remember to breathe. Through the window, she could see Silas with the children. He'd put them to work on chores, keeping them busy, but his eyes kept straying to the house. Once, during a break between contractions, Rowan caught his gaze. The fear on his face nearly broke her. He's scared, Alice said, following her gaze. His first wife died. I know, everyone knows. Alice guided Rowan back to pacing. But you're not her. You're younger, stronger, and you don't have fever. You've got a better chance than most. That's supposed to be comforting? It's supposed to be true. Comfort's overrated in childbirth. Truth's more useful. Despite everything, Rowan almost laughed. You sound like someone I used to know. Yeah? They smart? Very. Then listen to me like you listen to them. This is going to hurt worse than anything you've felt. It's going to feel impossible. You're going to want to quit, but you can't quit, so you won't. You'll get through it because that's what women do. We endure. Another contraction hit stronger than the others, stealing Rowan's breath and her ability to think. She gripped the chair until her knuckles went white, making sounds she didn't recognize. When it passed, Alice nodded approvingly. That's good. Don't hold back. Scream if you need to. Nobody out here is going to judge you for it. The day dragged on. The contractions got closer, harder, until there was barely any break between them. Rowan stopped walking and climbed onto the bed Alice had prepared with clean linens and old cloths. Everything below her waist felt like it was being torn apart from the inside. I can't, she gasped between contractions. I can't do this. You are doing it, Alice said firmly, and you're going to keep doing it until that baby's born. Now on the next one, I need you to push. What if I can't? You can. When I say push, you push like you're trying to move the whole world. Understand? The next contraction built like a wave. Alice counted, directing, and Rowan pushed with everything she had. Once, twice, again and again, until she lost count, lost track of time, lost everything except the singular focus of getting this baby out. I can see the head, Alice said. One more good push. Rowan didn't think she had another one in her. Every muscle screamed. Her body felt like it was breaking. But she gathered what was left of her strength and pushed anyway, harder than she'd ever pushed for anything, and suddenly there was movement and release and the sound of crying. A baby's cry. Her baby's cry. "It's a girl," Alice announced, working quickly. "And she's got a good set of lungs." Rowan collapsed back against the pillows, shaking and exhausted, barely able to process what had just happened. Alice cleaned the baby, wrapped her in soft cloth, and placed her on Rowan's chest. She was tiny. Red-faced and angry, fists waving, eyes squinted shut against the brightness of the world. Dark hair plastered to her head. Absolutely perfect. "Hello," Rowan whispered, touching that impossibly small face. "Hello, little one." The baby stopped crying at the sound of her voice, turning toward it instinctively. Rowan's heart cracked open. "She's beautiful," Alice said, working on delivering the afterbirth. "Good size, good color, good cry. You did well, Mrs. Mercer." "Is she really all right?" "She's perfect, and so are you. Bleeding's normal. No tears I can't handle. You'll be sore for a while, but you'll heal." Rowan couldn't stop looking at her daughter. This tiny person who'd been part of her for 9 months was now separate, real, here. The weight of her was almost nothing, but it felt like everything. The door opened carefully. Silas stood there, white as snow, eyes wide. Are they? Come see your daughter," Rowan said. He crossed the room in 3 strides, knelt beside the bed, and stared at the baby like he couldn't quite believe she was real. "A girl," he said softly. "A girl." Rowan tilted the bundle so he could see better. "Want to hold her?" He reached out with shaking hands. Alice showed him how to support the head, and then he was holding his daughter, this massive man cradling this tiny life, and his eyes filled with tears. "She looks like you," he said. "She looks like herself." But Rowan could see it too, something in the shape of the baby's face, the set of her mouth, that echoed Silas. "What are we going to name her?" They discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at her daughter's face, Rowan knew. "Clara," she said, "after my mother." "Clara Mercer." Silas tested it. "I like it." "Clara," the baby seemed to agree, making a small sound that wasn't quite a cry. The other children appeared in the doorway, hesitant. Sarah held Lily's hand. Daniel stood behind them, trying to look unaffected, but failing. "Come meet your sister," Silas said. They crowded around the bed, staring at the baby with wonder. Lily reached out one finger and touched Clara's hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around it automatically, and Lily gasped. "She's holding me!" "She is," Rowan agreed, exhaustion making her voice rough. "Can I hold her?" Sarah asked. Silas carefully transferred the baby to Sarah's arms, showing her how to support the head. The girl held Clara like she was made of glass, face full of wonder and terror. "She's so small." "You were this small once," Rowan said. "I don't remember being this small." "None of us do. But we all started here." She watched Sarah with Clara, saw how carefully the girl cradled her, how gently she touched the baby's cheek. "You're going to be a wonderful big sister." "I hope so." Sarah looked up, and her eyes were bright. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not dying." The words hung in the air, stark and honest. Rowan's throat tightened. "I promised I'd fight. I keep my promises." Each child held Clara in turn, even Daniel, who looked terrified the whole time, but refused to pass up the chance. Then Alice shooed them all out, so Rowan could rest and nurse the baby. "First feeding's important," Alice said, helping position Clara. "Might take a few tries to get the hang of it." It did. Clara fussed, and Rowan fumbled, neither of them quite sure what they were doing. But eventually instinct kicked in and the baby latched, nursing with single-minded intensity. "There you go," Alice said approvingly. "You're doing fine." When Clara finished and fell asleep against Rowan's chest, Alice tucked the blankets around them both. "I'll stay tonight to make sure there's no complications. Tomorrow, if everything looks good, I'll head home. You'll need to rest for at least 2 weeks. No heavy work, no lifting anything heavier than the baby. Let your family help." "I will. And if you see anything wrong, heavy bleeding, fever, anything that feels off, you send for me immediately. Understand?" "Yes." Alice gathered her things, then paused at the door. "You did good today, Mrs. Mercer. Your daughter's lucky to have you." Before Rowan could respond, she was gone. Rowan lay back, cradling Clara, feeling the weight and warmth of her. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the homestead. Silas's voice giving instructions, Daniel chopping wood, Sarah talking to Lily, chickens clucking, the wind moving through grass. The sounds of home. She'd survived. They'd both survived. Against odds that had killed better women in better circumstances, they'd made it through. Clara stirred against her chest, making small sounds in her sleep. Rowan stroked that dark hair, so soft it barely felt real, and let herself cry. Not from pain or fear, but from overwhelming relief and love and the weight of responsibility that came with this new life. She was a mother now. Not just a wife. Not just a guardian to children who'd lost their parents, but a mother to a daughter who would need her for years to come. The thought was terrifying. The thought was perfect. Silas came in as the light was fading, carrying a cup of water and some bread. He helped her sit up enough to eat and drink, then settled in the chair beside the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I just pushed a whole person out of my body." He smiled slightly. "Fair assessment. But alive, which is more than I was sure of this morning." "Don't say that." "It's true, though. I saw your face. You thought you were going to lose me." He looked down at his hands. "I was terrified. So was I." She shifted Clara carefully. "But we made it, all three of us." "All three of you," he corrected, and she realized he was counting the whole household. "All six of us, then." "7 with Rufus." She laughed, then winced. "Don't make me laugh. Everything hurts." "Sorry." But he was smiling. He reached out and traced Clara's tiny hand with one finger. "She's incredible." She is." Rowan watched her daughter sleep, watched Silas watch her, and felt something settle in her chest. "We did this. We made a family out of nothing but hope and stubbornness." "Mostly stubbornness." "Mostly," she agreed. They sat in comfortable silence while darkness gathered outside and Clara slept between them, proof that impossible things could happen if you refused to quit. The next weeks were a blur of feeding and sleeping and trying to heal while caring for a newborn who seemed to need something every hour. Clara was a good baby, as babies went, but she was still a baby, which meant crying and mess and constant vigilance. Rowan had never been so exhausted in her life. The children helped more than she'd expected. Sarah became an expert at swaddling and rocking Clara when Rowan needed a few minutes to herself. Daniel took over even more of the outdoor work, working alongside Silas from dawn to dark. Lily appointed herself Clara's guardian, sitting beside the cradle and singing nonsense songs that somehow soothed the baby when nothing else would. "You've got good helpers," Alice said when she came back a week later to check on them. She examined Rowan, declared her healing well, and admired Clara's healthy weight gain. "I don't know what I'd do without them." "You'd manage. Women always do, but it's easier with help." Alice packed up her supplies. "You're doing everything right, Mrs. Mercer. Keep it up." After she left, Rowan carried Clara out to the porch where Silas was replacing boards that had rotted through. He looked up, saw them, and smiled in a way that made her heart skip. "She let you put her down long enough to walk outside. For now, I give it 10 minutes before she demands to eat again." He came over and kissed Rowan's forehead, then Clara's. "She's got an appetite, like her father." "Hey now." Clara chose that moment to start fussing. Rowan sighed. "That was 5 minutes. She's getting more demanding." "Takes after her mother, then." She elbowed him gently, careful not to jostle the baby. They stood together on the porch, watching the prairie where heat shimmered and grass bent under an endless wind. The peach trees had survived the summer, small but alive, leaves rustling. "You ever think about how different everything could have been?" Rowan asked. "If I hadn't answered your advertisement? If you'd chosen someone else?" "All the time." His arm came around her shoulders. "And every time I'm grateful for what we got instead. Even with 3 extra children and a newborn and a wife who can barely walk without everything hurting, especially with all that." He kissed her temple. "You gave me a life worth living, Rowan. That's more than I ever hoped for." Clara's fussing turned into full crying. Rowan shifted her, preparing to go inside and nurse. "I love you," she said, the words coming easier now than they had in the beginning. "I love you too." Silas held the door open for her. "Now go feed our daughter before she wakes the whole county." Rowan went inside, settled into the chair they'd set up near the window, and nursed Clara while watching her family move about their lives. Sarah was teaching Lily how to knead bread dough. Daniel was stacking firewood with careful precision. Silas returned to the porch repairs, working steadily. This was what she'd fought for, not just survival, but this, the ordinary, beautiful chaos of life continuing despite everything that tried to stop it. Clara finished nursing and fell asleep against her chest. Rowan didn't move, content to hold her daughter and watch the world through the window. There would be harder days ahead. Winter would come again. Crops might fail. People might get sick. The frontier didn't stop testing just because you'd survived once. But for now, in this moment, they had enough. They had each other. They had a roof and food and land that was theirs. They had children who laughed and worked and belonged. They had a baby who'd entered the world screaming and hadn't stopped demanding her place in it. They had everything that mattered. Outside, the wind moved through the grass, and the peach trees stood against the sky, and the prairie rolled on forever, indifferent and eternal. Inside, a family held together by choice rather than blood continued the work of living. And Rowan Mercer, who'd arrived with nothing and expected nothing, held her daughter close and knew that she'd found exactly what she'd been searching for all along. Clara turned 3 months old on a morning when frost painted the windows white, and the first real cold of autumn settled over the prairie. Rowan woke to find her daughter already awake in the cradle beside the bed, staring at nothing with that intense focus babies had, like they were working out the mysteries of the universe one thought at a time. "Good morning, little philosopher," Rowan whispered, lifting her out. Clara made a sound that wasn't quite a coo but was getting closer, and Rowan's heart did what it always did when her daughter looked at her, melted completely. Silas was already up, had been for an hour judging by the smell of coffee and the sounds of movement in the main room. Rowan carried Clara out to find him at the table with Daniel, both of them bent over papers covered in figures. "What's this?" she asked. Silas looked up. "Planning next year's planting. Daniel thinks we should expand the wheat field." "We could use the income," Daniel said, not looking up from his calculations. The boy had taken to numbers the way some people took to music, finding patterns and possibilities where others saw only work. "If we clear another 2 acres and the weather cooperates, we could increase yield by 30%. "That's a lot of clearing," Rowan said. "I know, but I talked to Mr. Henderson. He said if we help with his harvest, he'll help with our clearing. Fair trade." Rowan looked at Silas, who was watching Daniel with something like pride. "What do you think?" "I think he's right, and I think he's earned a say in what we do with this land." Daniel's head came up, eyes wide. "Really? Really? You work harder than most grown men I know. About time we treated you like a partner instead of just help." The boy's face did something complicated. He ducked his head, but not before Rowan saw the shine in his eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just keep making smart decisions." Sarah emerged from the bedroom she shared with Lily, already dressed, hair braided back. At 15 now, she'd grown into herself, lost some of that sharp-edged wariness, and gained something steadier. She still had moments when the walls went up, when she retreated into silence, but they were rarer now. "I need to talk to you both," she said, not quite meeting their eyes. Rowan's stomach tightened. That tone never meant good news. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Sarah took a breath. "Mrs. Yates asked if I'd be interested in working at the general store a few days a week. She needs help with inventory and the books, and she said, I'm good with numbers." "You are good with numbers," Silas said. "What'd you tell her?" "That I needed to ask you first. That I couldn't just leave without making sure it was all right." Rowan shifted Clara to her other hip. "Sarah, you don't need our permission to work." "Don't I? This is my home. You took us in when no one else would. I can't just—" "You can," Rowan interrupted gently. "You're not a prisoner here. If you want to work at the store, work at the store. We'll manage. But who's going to help with Clara and the cooking and— We'll figure it out. That's what families do." Silas stood up, crossed to Sarah, put a hand on her shoulder. "You've been taking care of your siblings since you were younger than Lily is now. Maybe it's time you got to do something just for yourself." Sarah's eyes filled. "I don't want you to think I'm abandoning you. We don't think that. We think you're growing up and finding your way, and that's exactly what you're supposed to do." Rowan came over, still holding Clara. "Take the job, learn the business, see what else is out there beyond this homestead. You've earned that. What if I'm not ready? Nobody's ever ready. You just do it anyway and figure it out as you go. Rowan smiled. Trust me, I know from experience. Sarah laughed wetly, wiped her eyes. All right, I'll tell Mrs. Yates yes. Good. Silas squeezed at her shoulder. We're proud of you, Sarah. Don't forget that. The girl nodded, not trusting her voice, and disappeared outside before anyone could see her cry. Through the window, Rowan watched her walk toward the barn, shoulders shaking. She's going to leave eventually, Silas said quietly. All of them will. I know. You all right with that? Rowan looked down at Clara, who was trying to grab her own feet with determined focus. I'm all right with them having choices. That's all I ever wanted for any of them, the chance to choose their own lives instead of having circumstances choose for them. Even if they choose to leave? Especially then. She met his eyes. We gave them a place to land. Now we have to let them fly when they're ready. He pulled her close, careful not to squish Clara between them. How'd you get so wise? Necessity, and a stubborn refusal to repeat my parents' mistakes. Clara protested being squished, making sounds of displeasure. Silas laughed and stepped back, reaching out to touch his daughter's cheek. She's got opinions already. Wonder where she gets that from. Definitely you. Definitely both of us, Rowan corrected, and went to start breakfast. The seasons turned with the steady inevitability of the prairie itself. Sarah started working at the general store 3 days a week, taking the wagon into town and coming back with stories about customers and inventory and the small dramas of Hayes Station. She was good at it, good with people, in a way that surprised everyone, including herself. Mrs. Yates talked about teaching her the full business, about possibly selling her the store when she retired. What do you think? Sarah asked Rowan one evening. Would that be crazy? Me running a store? I think you could run anything you set your mind to. But a store, that's permanent. That's putting down roots. Is that what scares you, the permanence? Sarah was quiet for a long time. I spent so long thinking I had to be ready to run. After Ma and Pa died, after we got shuffled around, I never let myself believe anywhere was really home. Even here, for the first year, I kept expecting it to end, kept waiting for the day you'd tell us we had to leave. And now? Now I'm tired of running. I want to stay. I want to build something. But wanting that feels dangerous, like I'm tempting fate. Rowan understood that better than Sarah knew. The thing about roots is they make you vulnerable. If the tree gets cut down, you can't just pick up and move. You're stuck. But roots also make you strong. They give you something to draw from when times get hard. There's no right answer, Sarah. Just what feels true for you. It feels true, Sarah admitted. Staying, building, having something that's mine. Then that's your answer. Sarah worked at the store and Daniel worked the land and Lily started attending school in town, writing in with Sarah and coming back full of stories about letters and numbers and the other children. The homestead adjusted to the new rhythms, and Rowan adjusted to spending more time alone with Clara during the days. Not that she minded. Her daughter was fascinating, learning to roll over, then to sit up, then to crawl with determined focus toward anything shiny or dangerous. She had Silas's coloring and Rowan's stubborn chin, and she approached the world with curiosity that bordered on reckless. She's going to be trouble, Silas said one evening, watching Clara try to pull herself up on the furniture and faceplant for the dozenth time. She already is trouble. Rowan scooped up her daughter before she could try again. But she's our trouble. Clara grabbed Rowan's face with both hands, squeezing her cheeks and laughing. Rowan laughed back and Silas joined in, and for a moment everything was simple and perfect and exactly what it was supposed to be. Then winter came early and hard, bringing storms that buried the prairie under snow and ice that made every task twice as difficult. They lost 3 cattle to the cold and nearly lost Daniel when he fell through ice covering a creek. Silas pulled him out, got him inside, and they spent a terrifying night making sure the boy didn't develop fever from the dunking. He survived, but it was a reminder of how quickly things could turn, how the frontier gave with one hand and took with the other, and you never knew which it would be until it was too late to prepare. I'm sorry, Daniel said the next morning, wrapped in blankets by the stove. For what? Silas asked. For being careless. For not checking the ice. For nearly... His voice cracked. For being human. Silas sat down beside him. We all make mistakes, Daniel. The question is whether we learn from them. Did you learn? Yes, sir. Then that's the end of it. No more apologies. But the incident shook them all. Rowan found herself checking on the children more often, worrying about every cough, every fever, every risk. Clara was 6 months old now, sitting up and babbling and completely unaware of all the ways the world could hurt her. Rowan wanted to protect her from everything, knowing it was impossible, hating the helplessness of loving someone that much. You can't keep them safe from everything, Silas said one night, finding her standing over Clara's cradle for the 3rd time. I can try. You can drive yourself crazy trying, or you can accept that life is risk and do the best you can. That's a terrible philosophy. It's the only one that works out here. He pulled her back to bed. Come on. Clara's fine. Daniel's fine. Sarah and Lily are fine. Everyone's fine. Get some sleep before you collapse. She let him pull her close, let his warmth and steadiness ground her. What if something happens? Then we'll deal with it. Together. Like we always do. Promise? Promise. She fell asleep against his shoulder, and if her dreams were full of ice and fever and children falling through cracks in the world, at least she woke to find everyone still breathing. Spring came late that year, arriving in fits and starts, snow melting and then freezing again, the ground turning to mud that sucked at boots and wagon wheels. But when it finally committed to staying, it brought something unexpected. The peach trees bloomed. Rowan discovered it one morning, walking out to check the garden. There, on branches that had looked dead all winter, were tiny pink blossoms. Not many, just a handful on each tree, but unmistakable. She stood staring at them, hardly daring to believe. Silas, she called. Silas, come look. He came running, probably thinking something was wrong. She pointed wordlessly at the blossoms. His face went slack with surprise. Well, I'll be damned. They made it. They actually made it. Looks like. He touched one of the blossoms gently, like it might disappear if he breathed wrong. Never thought I'd see peaches grow in Kansas. Shows what we know. Rowan laughed, sudden and bright. We plant impossible things and they grow anyway. Some of them, he corrected, some of them die. But some of them don't. Some of them survive despite everything telling them they shouldn't. And that's enough, isn't it? That's what hope looks like. He pulled her close, kissed her temple. Yeah, I guess it is. They stood there looking at the impossible blossoms while the prairie wind bent the grass, and Clara babbled from inside the house, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk screamed. The trees wouldn't produce fruit this year, too young, too fragile, still establishing themselves. But they'd bloomed, they'd proved they could survive here. Everything else would come in time. That summer brought changes beyond the peach trees. Tom Henderson died quietly in his sleep one July night, and his widow Margaret surprised everyone by asking Rowan to help her manage the homestead until she could sell it and move to town. Why me? Rowan asked, genuinely confused. Margaret looked uncomfortable. Because you're the only person who ever stood up to me and didn't back down. Because when I was cruel to you, you didn't crumble. You got stronger. She paused. I respected that even when I resented it, and I need someone strong right now. So Rowan helped her. Spent hours going through Tom's papers, figuring out debts and assets, helping Margaret understand what she had and what she could expect. It wasn't pleasant work. Margaret was still sharp-tongued and opinionated, but it was necessary. I was wrong about you, Margaret said one afternoon as they sorted through ledgers. Rowan looked up. What? When you first came here, I thought you'd fail. Thought you were too soft for this life. She didn't meet Rowan's eyes. I was wrong. You're tougher than most women born here. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm just stating facts. Margaret closed the ledger she'd been examining. You've built something real with Silas. Those children would have been lost without you. That baby of yours is thriving. You did what most people can't. You made a life from nothing. Rowan's throat tightened. So did you. 40 years on this land, raising crops and children and surviving everything the prairie threw at you. That counts for something. Does it? Sometimes I think I just endured. You actually lived. There's no just about enduring. Sometimes that's the bravest thing you can do.
Margaret's eyes were bright. Maybe, but I think I'd have been happier if I'd loved it more and fought it less, if I'd planted peach trees instead of giving up before I started.
It's not too late. Oh, it is. I'm too old and too tired and too done with this place. I'm going to sell to young people who still have hope, and I'm going to rent a room in town and tend a garden the size of a table and be perfectly content. She smiled slightly. But you keep planting impossible things. Someone should. She moved to town that fall, and the Hendersons' land sold to a young couple from Illinois. Rowan watched them arrive with their wagon full of hope and fear and determination, and she remembered stepping off the train 2 years ago with nothing but a cloth bag and desperation. She'd come so far since then. They all had. Clara turned 1 year old on a crisp October morning. They celebrated with a cake Sarah baked, lopsided but delicious, and presents the children had made themselves. Daniel carved a wooden horse. Sarah sewed a doll from scraps. Lily drew a picture of the family. Everyone's proportions wrong, but everyone's faces smiling. Clara didn't understand what was happening, but she loved the attention and the cake she was allowed to smash with both hands. She laughed and made a mess and was perfectly, wonderfully one. "Can you believe it's been a year?" Rowan said that night, lying in bed with Silas. "Barely. Feels like yesterday and forever ago at the same time." "I know what you mean." She turned to look at him in the darkness. "Are you happy?" "Why are you asking?" "Because I am. Happier than I ever thought I'd be. And I want to know if you are too." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't think I'd ever be happy again after Catherine died. Thought that part of my life was over. Then you showed up with your one bag and your stubborn chin and your refusal to quit, and you proved me wrong about everything." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." "I'm happy, Rowan. Happier than I deserve to be." "You deserve it. We both do." She kissed him, and he kissed her back, and they made love quietly while their daughter slept in the next room, and the house creaked around them, and the prairie wind sang its eternal song. Winter came again, and this time they were ready for it. Supplies stockpiled, animals sheltered, wood stacked high against the cold. They'd learned from previous years, knew what to expect, had prepared accordingly. Sarah announced she was buying the general store. Mrs. Yates had agreed to sell it to her for a price Sarah could manage if she worked hard and saved carefully. She'd be a business owner at 16, responsible for inventory and customers and keeping the whole thing running. "You think I'm crazy," she said when she told them. "I think you're brave," Rowan said, "and I think you're going to be successful." "What if I fail?" "Then you fail and try something else. But I don't think you will." Sarah didn't fail. By spring, she'd reorganized the inventory, brought in new suppliers, and increased business enough that she hired help 2 days a week. People started coming to her with questions, with problems, with requests. She became someone the community relied on. Daniel announced he wanted to stay on the homestead permanently, to work the land alongside Silas, to build something lasting. Silas drew up papers that made him an official partner, gave him a share of the profits, treated him like the man he was becoming instead of the boy he'd been. "This land will be yours someday," Silas told him. "Might as well start treating it like it." Even Lily, still young but growing fast, started showing signs of who she'd become. She loved school, loved learning, talked about being a teacher when she grew up. Rowan encouraged her, remembering her own teaching days with less pain now and more appreciation for what they'd taught her. The peach trees bore fruit that summer. Not much, a dozen peaches total between both trees, but real, actual peaches that tasted like sunshine and sweetness and impossible victories. Rowan made preserves from them, storing them in jars like treasure, saving them for special occasions. She gave one jar to Margaret, who cried when she opened it. "I told you they'd grow," Rowan said. "I didn't believe you." "I barely believed me, but we planted them anyway." "That's the difference between us," Margaret said. "You plant things even when you don't believe. I only plant things I know will survive. Your way is harder, but better." "I don't know about better, just different." "Better," Margaret insisted. "Trust me on this." Clara turned 2, then 3, growing from a baby into a small person with opinions and preferences and a will that could bend iron. She looked more like Silas every day, but had Rowan's determination, and Sarah's stubbornness, and Daniel's curiosity, and Lily's joy. She was all of them, and none of them, and entirely herself. "She's going to run this place someday. Silas said, watching her order the chickens around like tiny servants. Heaven help us all, Rowan agreed. But she said it with love, with pride, with the bone-deep satisfaction of watching someone she'd grown inside her body become their own person in the world. The homestead expanded. They added rooms to the house, one for Daniel, one for the girls to share properly, one for Clara when she was old enough. They planted more trees, not just peaches, but apples and pears, creating an orchard that might take years to mature, but would stand for generations. They built better fences, acquired more cattle, turned the struggling homestead Silas had worked alone into something approaching prosperity. It wasn't easy. There were still hard seasons, failed crops, animals lost to disease or weather. There were still moments when money was tight and choices were impossible and everyone went to bed tired and woke up sore. But there were also moments of grace, of laughter around the dinner table, of Sarah coming home with stories from the store, of Daniel showing Clara how to feed the chickens, of Lily reading aloud to anyone who would listen, of Silas and Rowan stealing moments alone on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie gold and red and purple. Those moments mattered more than the hard ones. They added up to something bigger than any individual day. They added up to a life. One evening in late summer, when Clara was 4 and the peach trees were heavy with fruit and the prairie was green from unexpected rain, Rowan stood outside and looked at everything they'd built. The house, expanded and sturdy. The barn, repaired and functional. The gardens, productive and carefully tended. The orchard, young but established, promising future harvests. The fences, straight and strong. The children, growing into capable adults. The husband, still steady and solid, and hers. "What are you thinking about?" Silas asked, coming to stand beside her. "Everything, all of it. How different it is from where we started." "You regret any of it?" "Not even the hard parts. Those made us who we are." She leaned into him. "I was thinking about the woman who stepped off that train, how scared she was, how certain she was that she'd made a mistake. And now I know it wasn't a mistake. It was the first smart choice I made in years." She turned to face him. "You saved my life, Silas Mercer. Not by giving me a place to stay or food to eat, but by showing me it was possible to start over, to build something new from broken pieces. You did that yourself. We did it together. That's the point." She gestured at the homestead, at the children visible through the windows, at the land stretching to the horizon. "None of this was here when we started. We made it, from nothing but stubbornness and hope and refusing to quit when things got hard." "And peach trees," he added. "Don't forget the peach trees." She laughed. "Especially the peach trees." Clara ran out of the house, chasing Rufus, who'd gotten old and gray, but still played when the mood struck. Lily followed, calling for them to slow down. Inside, Sarah was teaching Daniel some new mathematics she'd learned from the traveling teacher who came through town. The sounds of their voices mixed with the evening birds and the wind and the distant lowing of cattle. "This is what legacy looks like," Rowan said quietly. "Not land or money or things that last after we're gone, but people, connections, the choice to keep choosing each other even when it's hard. That's a better legacy than most people get. It's more than I thought I deserved." He pulled her close. "You deserve everything good that's ever happened to you and more. Don't forget that." She wouldn't. She'd learned too much in the years since arriving on the prairie. About resilience, about love, about the way broken things could heal if you gave them time and care and refused to give up on them. She'd learned that home wasn't a place you found, but something you built with your own hands and the help of people who chose to stay. That family wasn't just blood, but the bonds you forged in fire and difficulty and shared work. That hope was a choice you made every morning, planting seeds that might not grow, but planting them anyway because the alternative was giving up. She'd learned that the frontier tested everyone who came to it, broke some, and forged others. And the difference wasn't in strength or preparation, but in the willingness to keep going even when everything said to quit. Most of all, she'd learned that love, real, lasting love, wasn't about perfection or smooth sailing or getting everything right. It was about showing up, about choosing each other, about building something together that neither could have built alone. The sun dropped toward the horizon, painting everything gold. Clara shrieked with laughter as Rufus let her catch him. Lily joined the game, and soon all three were tumbling in the grass. Sarah appeared in the doorway, smiling at the chaos. Daniel came up behind her, said something that made her laugh. This was it. This was everything. Rowan stood with Silas's arm around her shoulders and watched her family exist in the simple joy of an ordinary evening, and she knew with absolute certainty that answering that advertisement had been the best choice she'd ever made. Not because it had been easy, not because everything had worked out perfectly, but because it had given her this, a chance to become someone who built instead of ran, who loved instead of feared, who planted impossible things and watched them grow. "Thank you," she said to Silas. "For what?" "For asking for a partner instead of a servant, for seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for building this with me." He kissed her forehead. "Thank you for answering, for staying, for being stubborn enough to make this work." They stood together as darkness gathered and the stars emerged and the prairie settled into its nighttime rhythms. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, new decisions to make. But tonight, they had this. They had each other. They had everything that mattered. And when Rowan finally went inside, calling the children to supper, she paused in the doorway to look back at the land one more time. The peach trees stood silhouetted against the deepening sky, bearing fruit that shouldn't exist this far north, thriving against all reasonable odds. Just like her. Just like all of them. She smiled and went inside to her family, closing the door on the Kansas night, knowing that when morning came, they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything else. Together, stubborn, and absolutely refusing to quit. The frontier had tested them, and they'd passed. Not perfectly, not without scars, but they'd survived and grown and built something lasting from nothing but determination and love. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered.